there's just this sadness to all of it. There's just like, they have this idea like, oh, they're remembering the whimsy of those days and the adventure of those days. But then there's like a piece of dialogue or a line that kind of undercuts it. And I suddenly just become like, really sad while reading. But it's good. I like that aspect of it, but it's just interesting where, you start reading this book and you're really into like the mystery of like what's happening. But then you have like all this extra material that's added into it that's giving the world more context. But it's just something very melancholy about it all. And I think that's really cool. And it really just shows you like, hey, yeah, you can live in you can have these amazing adventures and things. But when you come back home and your life might be like a mess after your crime fighting career, you create many enemies. You can make yourself your own worst enemy, which is in the case of a lot of these characters is exactly what happens. So yeah, there's something about the extra material that just kind of hits me. That still gets me to this day. Hello, and thank you for checking out the video. I just want to let you know that I not only create content on my YouTube channel, Class on the Glass, but I'm also on Twitch, where I review movies, cartoons, and TV shows live, while also playing single-player games and multiplayer games. I also have a Patreon where subscribers have access to hundreds of video and audio commentaries for films and cartoons, as well as podcasts and videocasts. In the meantime, thank you again for watching. Enjoy the video. We're going to go ahead and we're going to move on to the next part of my show, and that is Comic Book Corner. And today's episode is made possible by Tyrese. Thank you so much, Tyrese, for being a Patreon subscriber and for suggesting today's book, which is Alan Moore's Watchmen. And to provide you with a brief synopsis and background for the book chat, of course, it's created by Alan Moore, Dave Gibbons, and John Higgins. And Watchmen is a 12-issue miniseries published between 1986 and 1987. The story presents an alternate history in which superheroes became a mainstay of everyday life in the 1940s and all the way up to the mid-1980s. Due to the presence and influence of superheroes, numerous historical events have changed, such as the United States winning the Vietnam War, to Richard Nixon winning multiple terms as President of the United States. When a former hero and government agent is murdered, multiple heroes investigate the crime and reveal a sinister conspiracy that could destroy the entire world. Before jumping into the book itself, I do want to talk about Watchmen's history, its legacy, and its author, Alan Moore. The overall premise of Watchmen, as described by Moore himself, was what would superheroes be like in a real and credible world? And in the book, it turns out that many of these heroes, if you even want to call them that, would suffer from numerous issues, ranging from struggles with morality, existentialism, substance abuse, and even impotence, chat. They can't get up very well, except if they're wearing the costume. All the while living in a world dominated by socio-political issues. Originally, Moore wanted to use old Charlton Comics characters, acquired by DC some time ago. Those characters included people like Blue Beetle, Captain Atom, and The Question. But Moore was convinced by DC editors at the time to create original characters instead. And it was a critical and commercial success in its initial run, and has gone on to be one of the best-selling graphic novels of all time in its collected format. It's been praised for its story, its characters, its variety of themes, the fact that it's political satire, and much like The Dark Knight Returns, which was being released at the same time, was credited with reinvigorating the medium, the comic book medium, and acted, I think, as a gateway to comics themselves. There were attempts to adapt the book for years, much to the chagrin of Alan Moore, who hated the idea of his works being adapted, and also just hated any comic book material being adapted in any form. Didn't matter if it was his. It was finally realized, it was finally adapted by Zack Snyder, and was released theatrically, I believe, in 2009, to pretty mixed reviews, and was also a box office failure. However, I learned this today, chat, while prepping for this review and breakdown. It performed very well on VOD, and it had a variety of different, cuts and other releases, chat. I mean, one of Zack Snyder's many director's cuts, chat, where it includes a whole bunch of extra material that was exercised from the original movie. Listen, I'll tell you right now, I am a huge fan of the Watchmen comic, and I was never against the idea of it being adapted. I think you could easily actually adapt this. People have always described this book as like it's impossible. It's absolutely impossible to adapt. Don't even bother. I'm like, no, the material I think would be quite easy to adapt. Now, I don't think it would work as a movie. I just think there's just too much material, and if you want to fit everything down in the 2 hours, you're going to have to strip so much of the important aspects of the book. And so I've said for a very long time that it would have worked much better as a, 10 episode, 12 episode, 13 episode, whatever, miniseries. I think that would honestly been perfect for it, but they made a movie. And, Zack Snyder, I think, was the absolute wrong person to adapt this material. I think a lot of the themes and the socio-political aspects of the book are kind of lost on someone like Snyder, who, is a very visual person. Like, he is by no... Even the people that praise him the most would say he's not the best writer. And no, and he is not. He's, in my opinion, a terrible writer. And I think a lot of those themes, of those little socio-political aspects, were lost in his adaptation. And, visually, yeah, was there some cool things in there? Sure. I still feel like it indulges too much in his sensibilities, like the constant slow motion, the blue-gray color palette. It just dominates the aesthetic of the film. I don't think that works very well. However, I will praise him for this. I will say that he did do one thing, a change. He made a change that I think actually improved upon the work. Of course, there's the infamous, squid from the movie, which is, part of Ozymandias' evil plan to kind of reunite humanity around a extraterrestrial threat, right? And results in the deaths of millions upon millions of people. He changed it where basically Dr. Manhattan, quote unquote, is seemingly responsible for all those deaths and is blamed for the attack on New York. And that's how it works out. So there's no giant squid, whatsoever. And I'm like, you know what? That's actually a cool idea. And it also kind of connects to like humanity's fear of someone like Dr. Manhattan as well. And so I actually liked that change quite a bit. I thought it actually worked even better than in the graphic novel, because the explanation of how the squid came into existence is still nonsensical to me. As much as I love this book, and I do, Chad. I mean, I own it. I've read it many times. That is one of its flaws. So I will praise him for that. I will give him credit there, right? We'll talk more about the squid and how it's been used in the book and also by other people in just a bit. Actually, we can get into it right now. There have been other adaptations of Watchmen, including, in my opinion, the fantastic HBO series created by Damon Lindelof, which acted as a sequel to the original work set over 30 years in the future. And that show was kind of unusual to me because I don't know if it was the first to do that. There's probably other examples out there. I'm just unaware of them. But the idea of doing a sequel to a work, but in a different medium, is kind of foreign. It's like, okay, we're going to tell a television series as acting as a sequel to this comic book. It's like, that's really interesting to me. And I actually like that. I always wondered if getting into the show would be difficult, because if you haven't read the book, would you kind of understand like what's going on or what they're referring to? And of course, if you haven't, there's probably going to be some things that are going to be lost on you. Although Watchmen has been in the pop culture zeitgeist for nearly 40 years at this point. I mean, it is like one of the most important, I think, graphic novels of the last 40 years, chap, at least half a century. So, through cultural osmosis, people are probably just aware of some of the details of it. But I don't know. I kind of like that. I thought it was really unique, and I thought the show was great. Unlike, the movie, which I felt ignored a lot of the sociopolitical themes, this one embraces them, chat. And whereas, kind of the original work was, commenting everything from government oversight to, the Cold War. This one was taking a look at the sociopolitical aspects of racism, generational racism, along with, government oversight with that as well. And really, I think for the first time, in modern culture, presenting the Tulsa massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which I feel like for a lot of people of my generation and generations before mine, like that's not really common knowledge. Certainly it wasn't taught in like schools, and that's like the first episode that we're introduced to all of that. But it's within the context of this world, and I thought that was great. I thought that was amazing, right? And I know some people didn't like it, but overall I thought it was really, 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 really good. And I highly recommend. If you're a fan of the graphic novel, then I recommend certainly that series over Zack Snyder's movie. There have also been a variety of prequel and sequel comics over the years. I have not read them, and I'm unaware of how they were received by readers. I do know that Alan Moore absolutely despises the idea of sequels to his work, that, certainly sequels that he hasn't written, and the idea of adaptations as well. I did want to talk about Alan Moore as a creator for a bit. I think he's written some incredible books, even outside of Watchmen. Like Swamp Thing, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, certainly volumes 1 and volume 2. Batman: The Killing Joke, and more. The guy's a legend within the medium for a reason, chat. He pushed it forward. He made it more mature. He was doing things with heroes other creators would never have dreamed of, editors would never have dreamed of at the time, and he deserves all the credit in the world for that. His impact on the medium should absolutely be celebrated. But I can't say I'm a fan of his attitude and the way in which he has presented himself over the years. Listen, I can understand his displeasure over some of his works and how they've been adapted. No doubt about it. All right, I've seen Watchmen. I've seen The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I've seen parts from Hell. Felt like a fever dream. Like I get it. But his dismissiveness and his vitriol towards others other like creators and writers and artists, that's always rubbed me the wrong way. His hatred of his past work and his just lack of respect towards it, and certainly other people's work in his own field, has always just kind of come across as mean and pretentious. And like the Alan Moore is funny because there was like a video series, I want to say, this like writing video series where you can like download this course, and it was being presented by Alan Moore, and he talked about like the process of writing. And so I was like, oh, what's the process of writing? Is that you actually create, you come up with the ideas for your work, then you write out your work, you publish your work, and then you hate it for the rest of your life. That's what he goes. That's his cycle. That's what it always is. Like, he has talked, shit about his work for years. Everything from Watchmen, everything from League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Swamp Thing, and everything else in between. Like, I don't know why he is that. Like, something clearly happened to him, and he definitely rubbed shoulders with the wrong people, and it certainly made him very, very bitter. But I just don't, I don't like the way he comes across, and the way he's treated others, I think, is pretty disrespectful. It's not like everything he's written is a masterpiece, okay? The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen Volume 3 is pure fucking nonsense. It's like, this is, compared to the first two, which are amazing, which are great, which are taking, like, literary characters like, Invisible Man or Mina Harker or Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, and where they have to form this superhero team, but they're all fucking dysfunctional. The Invisible Man's a rapist. Mina Harker is dealing with, the effects of her vampirism. Alan Quartermain is a heroin addict. It's like, it's great, and then Volume 3 is just nonsense. It doesn't even make any sense. Or like From Hell, which I think is just overly long and very pretentious. Again, he's obviously bitter, and he's very much a dick. But that's who he is. I think been for a long time. And I can at least say, like, hey, at least he's not pretending to be something he's not. At least he's not keeping this all secret. He is very much putting out there. He was like, hey, this is the way I am. Love me or hate me. This is my attitude. It's like, all right, fair enough. But it's always rubbed me the wrong way that he's presented himself that way. Because it's like, okay, you don't like how the comic book medium's like being handled itself right now for a variety of things, but there's still, it's not to say like he does this kind of everything's bad. He does this whole thing where every comic book that's being published right now is terrible. I'm just like, now when someone says something like that, that's ridiculous. It's like, sure, is like Spider-Man bad right now? Sure, there's other books that are bad right now. Yes, but I'm like, I recently started reading. This is again because of you guys. Something is Killing the Children, which is a great horror graphic novel series that I'm loving. That's so beautiful. It tells a captivating story, and the artwork's great. And it's like, to say that this is bad, that this is shit. It's like, first of all, he hasn't read any of this. What it is, he's talking out of his ass. He's talking out of his ass because of, who he is and what he's done. It's like, okay, but to be so dismissive of other people, I don't like that. I really dislike that about him. And I'm gonna praise this book for a variety of reasons, but I'm not gonna sit here and say like Alan Moore's right about everything, because he is simply not. And I vehemently disagree with him in regards to his other contemporaries, which he's dismissed, and obviously the people who have come after him, because there are plenty of talented people within this medium still. It's not like it's all bad. To say it's all bad, I think is ridiculous. But I just wanted to go ahead and state that. Moving on from the history and legacy of the book, I want to talk about the story and also the artwork itself. I consider myself, a pretty big fan of Watchmen, and it helped inform my love and my appreciation for the comic book medium. Though familiar now, the idea of a deconstructive superhero tale was a fresh one. And it's fascinating to see how these heroes and villains would operate in a world that is on the brink of collapse, during the Cold War. We're not only following the story of who killed this retired superhero, the comedian, but we're also looking at the lives of these heroes and how they changed, so specifically over their respective careers due to a variety of reasons, mostly because of trauma. In between the 12 issues, the miniseries made up of 12 issues, we get so much rich history for this world. Pages and chapters from retired heroes' memoir, newspaper articles about heroes turned businessmen like Ozymandias, and, the disturbing journal entries of, Walter J. Kovacs's Rorschach. It truly enriches the world and provides an overwhelming level of detail that immerses you into the story. It kind of also, in a weird way, so much of the extra material that's like mostly it's at the end of like the books, and so it extends it by, or each issue, so it extends like the pages by like 4 or 5 extra pages, because there's actually like articles that are written or chapters of like Hollis Mason's book is Night Owl, and how crime fighting like started in the 1940s, taking inspiration from the actual comics at the time, Superman comics, which they reference, and then later on actually seeing it happen in the real world. It's cool to see that, but I've always got like a bit of a sense of melancholy reading a lot of that, because all those articles, it always has this, even though like what they're talking about is like really interesting, there's just this sadness to all of it. There's just like, they have this idea like, oh, they're remembering the whimsy of those days and the adventure of those days, but then there's like a piece of dialogue or a line that kind of undercuts it. And I suddenly just become like, really sad while reading. But it's good. I like that aspect of it. But it's just interesting where you start reading this book and you're really into like the mystery of like what's happening. But then you have like all this extra material that's added into it that's giving the world more context. But it's just something very melancholy about it all. And I think that's really cool, and it really just shows you like, hey, yeah, you can live in you can have these amazing adventures and things, but when you come back home and your life might be like a mess after your crime fighting career, you create many enemies. You can make yourself your own worst enemy, which is in the case of a lot of these characters is exactly what happens. So yeah, there's something about the extra material that just kind of hits me. That still gets me to this day. The main plot, I think, is a great mystery in which, many characters, particularly Rorschach, is trying to figure out who killed the retired superhero, the comedian. At the scene of the crime, Rorschach even finds the iconic pin of the comedian, the smiley face, right? That has been the symbol for Watchmen forever. It's like as soon as you see that smiley face with the blood stain on it, you know exactly what that's from, where that book is from. Like it's brilliant. It's just like, wow, it just something about it just stands out. I mean, it's featured most of the time on the various graphic novels. The various reprints of it on posters, Chad. It's the first thing I think we often see when it comes to the marketing of whether it be like the movie or the TV show, right? It's an iconic design. It's just as, it's almost as iconic as Superman's S, as Batman's, bat symbol, if you will. It is the symbol of this work. It's an iconic image that I think also is meant to emulate something very specific, which is often referenced in the book itself, which is the doomsday clock. It's for those that don't know, the doomsday clock, it's a symbol that represents the likelihood of human-made global catastrophes overwhelming the world. It's been maintained, I think, since the late 1940s, pretty much, on the onset of the Cold War. And it's acting as a metaphor for the threat of humanity with its unchecked scientific and technological advances. And in this case, most of the time, nuclear weapons, nuclear proliferation. Since that's constantly talked about within the material itself. And so you have symbols that are referencing known symbology in our own culture. Also, we have the phrase, "Who watches the Watchmen?" which is, of course, said by the comedian in the book, but it's also featured mostly as graffiti numerous times, Chad. It's usually sprayed on, sides of buildings and when the Watchmen, when the characters have to break up a variety of riots, that's what a lot of people are saying, or, spraying or defacing government or public property, private property, excuse me. The phrase is pretty much the embodiment of the idea that it can be hard to hold those in power and accountable. It's like, okay, so the Watchmen are the ones that are watching the people, keeping them safe and making sure they do what they're supposed to do. But then who's watching these heroes? Who's watching them, both for good and ill? Who's watching them? And in this case, so few. And because there are so few people actually watching them, then you have individuals that take advantage of that use that to their own benefit and apply it to their own beliefs, their own set of beliefs and structures to control people. And that's certainly the case with someone like Ozymandias. Outside of the mystery and the sociopolitical satire, I think it's the characters that keep people so invested in the larger work. And there's a lot of characters in this book, both the main players and the supporting players and tertiary characters. Be here all day talking about them. But there are a number of characters I do want to specifically touch on. I just mentioned Ozymandias, Adrian Veidt. I believe that's how you say his name, Adrian Veidt, Ozymandias. And, he's a character that presents himself as this philanthropist, this humanitarian, this genius. He's drawn inspiration from one of the great conquerors of history, Alexander the Great. And since his costume career has ended, he's devoted himself to his various businesses and in his own words, to benefit humanity. Alan Moore has said that he took a lot of the Charlton character, Peter Cannon Thunderbolt, for his inspiration for Ozymandias. Now, for me personally, someone who is not as familiar with those characters, aside from a couple, which we'll get to, Ozymandias reminds me more of someone like a Reed Richards, or certainly a Tony Stark, someone who fancies himself, who wants to create a suit of armor, right, around the world, and wants to protect it, cultivate it, create it within their own image. And what they end up doing is in order to seemingly achieve that, is to create a great sacrifice. And in this case, obviously, in the book, like, the whole mystery is revealed. It's like, why was, Ozymandias doing all of these things? He wanted to like end the Cold War, but in order to do that, in order to bring about the East and the West and working together, he has to cause a huge humanitarian crisis in which millions of people die. And the way in which he unites the world is seemingly over this extraterrestrial threat, the giant squid that attacks New York City. And it just shows how this is a guy who it's a hero's fall. Like, he started as a hero, he started out with good intentions, and he becomes a villain. I guess almost like an anti-villain in the book, if you will. And he thinks like this is the right thing to do, and he's despite his intelligence, he's kind of blinded by the fact of the profound amount of human suffering that he causes. But if his plan were to be revealed, which of course is coming at the end of the graphic novel, if everything was to be revealed, then it would get even worse, and the doomsday clock would continue to tick, to the 12th hour, destroying everything. So he's kind of caught our heroes in this position where they can't do anything. I mean, it's the perfect evil plan, chat, but he's doing it seemingly for good reasons, even though the actions in which he takes are so horrible. But, he's a fascinating character, and, one that is so just morally complex, because you kind of understand him. It makes you feel bad about yourself, because you kind of understand, like, even other characters like Dr. Manhattan's like, oh, I kind of see what you did here, why you chose to make these decisions, because it could potentially lead to a better outcome if everything, goes according to plan, which, of course, nothing ever goes 100% according to plan. But I really do like Ozymandias, and I think he is a great villain, anti-villain for the book. Of course, there are many other characters. You have Daniel Dryberg, who is Night Owl, the second Night Owl, chat. And he's this like retired superhero who uses a bunch of owl-themed gadgets. Obviously, he's very reminiscent of Batman, of course, just by his designs and, his technology. Alan Moore has said that he's based off Ted Cord, who was the second Blue Beetle. He liked the idea of a hero not being the original hero, but someone who is like the apprentice who goes on to take on the mantle of that hero, which was the case of Ted Cord in the Charlton comics. And he's this guy who was inspired by other heroes, and, went on to have a successful superhero career, but, he became disenfranchised due to everything else that he was seeing, and he didn't feel like a hero anymore. But, since that was like the greatest, part of his life, we now see him in the book as someone who's kind of retired, is quiet, he's schlubby, he's fat, chat, he's impotent, There's a lot of discussion of his impotence in the book, and how like the only way in which he can actually like get excited, the only way in which he can perform is if he's doing the thing that brought him like any form of pleasure and love in this world, was being a superhero. And so I really liked how they kind of handled him. Alan Moore has also talked about how he's also a bit inspired by Superman's Clark Kent persona, who is supposed to be kind of like this everyman, but is also kind of nebbish and kind of clumsy. And it's just taken even further. It's like, hey, what if Superman couldn't get it up? What if Superman was impotent? And that's what Night Owl is. He's all these things. He's a little bit of Blue Beetle. He's a little bit of Batman, and he's a little bit of Superman's Clark Kent. But still a great character. And then we have Edward Blake, the comedian, which so much of this book is centered on. The series opens up with the comedian dying, horrifically, being severely beaten in his apartment and then thrown out of a skyscraper and then smushing on the ground. And then our hero's trying to figure out who did it, mostly specifically, Rorschach. And he's, one of two government-sanctioned heroes in the graphic novel. And, we see most of his story through a series of flashbacks, and we get a greater sense of personality and character. And, to me, he is probably most inspired by someone like Nick Fury. Okay, well, like what happens when someone has seemingly an unlimited amount of resources and is kind of turned into a weapon of his government, especially someone who is so incredibly seemingly amoral as he is. I mean, one of the first flashbacks we see the comedian is him trying to rape one of his fellow superheroes, chap, the first Silk Spectre. And it shows like, hey, not all these superheroes are heroic themselves. A lot of them have dubious morality. We see him do horrific things in the Vietnam War. You know, obviously killing various Vietnamese people, whether they were with the Viet Cong or not. Ends up murdering a pregnant woman who was pregnant with his child. You know, it's interesting how, like, the book takes this character who seemingly stands like, you know, he's initially like almost kind of like a Joker themed like individual. He's kind of like in a clown outfit and things. But then later on, as we see in the book, he kind of becomes this uber Captain America-esque, you know, character. Like his original clown outfit completely disappears. He's wearing almost like this leather bondage gimp mask gear. He has like a pauldron that has, you know, the red, white, and blue on it. Of course, his inspiration, Al Moore credits the character of Peacemaker, who was really originally a Charlton comic character, with being the big influence for the comedian. You totally see that. Like, you know, I mean, you can almost expect to see him as like, yeah, I mean, I'd kill for peace. I'd do anything for peace. I'll kill every man, woman, and child in order to attain peace. That's kind of what the comedian is. And he's also a bit of a nihilist, too, based on what he's been exposed to. And probably that's what informs his overall personality as someone who, why he's like, he doesn't care that he's, you know, raping all these people, or he has no emotion after, you know, killing this woman who's pregnant with his child. You know, that's probably why he is, because like it all doesn't matter. So, you know, we're all you know, pawns in this game and being used by all these bureaucrats. So why should I care what I do? Why should you care what he does? You know, and so, you know, he's a very nihilistic, despicable character in the book, but very interesting. And then we get to one of my other favorite, like one of the best characters, which is, you know, Dr. John Osterman, Dr. Manhattan. And he's the only superhero with actual superpowers. And, you know, he gained these abilities in this, I think, intrinsic field subtractor experiment. Some mumbo-jumbo scientific terms in, like, the late 1950s. And after getting these powers, like, it's about the idea of being a superhero and slowly losing your humanity over time. And they do it in great ways. One, because he just looks so different. He looks ethereal. He looks godlike. You know, when he's first coming after, you know, his horrible accident, which, you know, he's married and everything. He seemingly has a great life. You know, doing what he wants to do. We learn more about his history, his, you know, how him and his parents, you know, escaped from Europe during World War II, and, you know, he came here and is basically living the American dream, and then just a horrible accident happens to him. And, you know, over time, you know, in his backstory, we see him lose humanity. We see him disconnect from, like, other people, from his own wife. You know, also really cool details, you know, because we think of Dr. Manhattan, we see him where he's, like, naked most of the time. Like, he has his blue body, his dick's hanging out. It's not like, overly sexual at all. It's not sexual at all. It's just there. He's just like, I'm so powerful. It's like, why do I need to wear clothes? I'm not ashamed of my body. He doesn't even have shame. Where the concept of shame is so foreign to him now, you know, to a degree. And so that's why he kind of, like, over time, like in the flashbacks, he's like losing more and more of his clothes until before he's just naked all the time. He's like wearing this Speedo, you know, just kind of holding his package and everything. And so that's really interesting. But, you know, then as you know, he's basically used as a weapon. He is the thing that deters the Russians, the Soviets, from attacking the United States. He's the most powerful weapon in the world, and he's used by the United States government as such. But as, you know, he loses touch more of humanity, like there's like these great panels in which, you know, he goes on an interview and people are asking about him, about, you know, these tragic events, and he's just answering like it's just nothing. That, you know, because he's forgetting emotion. You know, it's just not as important to him. You know, he doesn't care about the lives of any of these, you know, people anymore. Seemingly doesn't, until he basically, you know, leaves and wants to create his own world, for himself. You know, something totally different. And, you know, he's eventually brought back into the fold later on in the graphic novel to deal with Ozymandias. But even how that wraps up is fascinating. I mean, he's like, oh yeah, this is actually to him, it's like, it's an interesting idea. Maybe this is what should be done. I think that's really cool. And there's just also like little aesthetic details too with him. Outside, I mean, he has his blue body, but like we see him like how he speaks. Like they do it for a number of characters, Rorschach as well, but they do it for him where like he'll have his speech bubbles. They're blue. They're all blue, and I think it's meant to make him like even like visually for the reader, like, okay, he's supposed to sound like really foreign. He's supposed to sound otherworldly, to everybody else. And I think that color change, it's very subtle. It's like, oh wow. It's a very subtle little detail where it's like meant to the reader to visually understand that, but then within the world, he probably sounds like really odd to everybody else. Again, to separate him more and more from humanity. But his entire story, his entire flashback sequence is one of the absolute best parts of the graphic novel. It is so good. And, we also have his lover at the time, which is Laurie Jupiter, who is the second Silk Spectre. She, like Night Owl too, is, the second iteration of a hero. She's the daughter of Sally Jupiter, who was the original Silk Spectre, and and of course, that character of Sally Jupiter, she had an extraordinarily strained relationship with the comedian, since the comedian raped her or attempted to rape her at one time, and with her, she's been in a relationship with Dr. Manhattan for years, since Dr. Manhattan eventually. He grows bored of his wife and, is having an affair with Laurie Jupiter. And, they've created kind of like this weird, almost apathetic relationship between the two of them where they're kind of just there for sex, honestly. It's kind of the one thing that keeps Dr. Manhattan grounded is that he's still having the sex. But she becomes, unsatisfied with that relationship. She is dealing with, the trauma of growing up in the shadow of her mother, of not knowing who her father was. I mean, her mother has a substance problem. Mother's a fucking alcoholic in the book. She's dealing with a wife. I mean, it almost kind of, her character almost feels like it's commenting on like celebrity culture to a degree. Or it's like you are the offspring of a notable public figure, right? And everyone expects you to be as good, if not better, than that notable public figure. And she has to deal with that constantly. Like you even, like there's earlier panels where we see her presented when she's like a teenager and her mother's trying to sell her off as the next Silk Spectre. Like, it's almost like those mothers that force those kids to participate in those toddler and tiara-esque pageants, which is like so gross to me. That's the kind of, it's like, what if that was for superheroes instead, right? But I feel like Silk Spectre is a character that has numerous daddy issues because she lacked a central father figure in her life and because of her strained relationship, obviously just with her own mother, and, learning about, the comedian and her issue dealing with the fact that was her father, all along. But then also why she gravitated towards like older men. You notice like she gravitates towards older men throughout the entire book. Like that is obviously the case with Dr. Manhattan, who's, despite his, immortality, is considerably older than her. And also later on where she gets a relationship with, Night Owl. She constantly is going towards those specific men. And I think it has to do with the fact that she just has numerous, daddy issues. But she's also a fascinating character, and she has a very important role to play in this graphic novel. But I saved this person for last, obviously, because, they definitely are. I would argue that the most popular character from the graphic novel, the most recognizable, which is Walter J. Kovacs's Rorschach, who is a vigilante who wears a white mask that contains this symmetrical but constantly shifting ink blot, like a Rorschach test. And, he continues to fight crime despite being labeled a vigilante and a murderer and is sought by the police. Alan Moore, obviously, his inspiration for Rorschach was two characters. He says that obviously The Question was a huge inspiration, but also Mr. A. And he wanted to create almost like a Steve Ditko-esque, vigilante crime-fighting character. And also you could say that to a degree there's a little bit of Batman in there as well. Someone who is clearly not mentally stable, indulging in superhero antics and escapades. And, he is one of the characters that we probably follow the most of the graphic novel. He's the one that kind of initiates the search for answers in regards to the comedian's murder. But he is a character that is clearly a psychopath. Like there's no doubt about it in terms of how he presents himself, the methods in which he uses to combat crime, and also just based on his background in history. He's definitely, Alan Moore has apparently been disturbed by people's embrace of the Rorschach character and their love for him. I wouldn't exactly be disturbed. I mean, I wouldn't want to. I think I don't think anyone wants to emulate Rorschach, but I think we all are always interested in individuals in fiction who are so different from us in the way in which they think. I think it's the same way why people are so obsessed with Batman as a character. He's so different compared to a lot of other DC characters because of his background, his history, his trauma, what happened to him. He doesn't have all these amazing abilities or superpowers or gadgets. He has to rely on his wit and his tenacity, but also his to a degree, I think even his mental illness. And I think that's certainly the case of someone like Rorschach, where we learn about he is the product of obviously his mother, who was a whore, doesn't even know who is so little about his actual parentage. He's raised in an extraordinarily abusive environment. He grew up poor. Then later on, after witnessing a horrific rape in which no one seemed to care, he finally dons this mask to fight against injustice. And you notice throughout the book, of course he has all of his, Rorschach's journal. He writes all of his journal entries down. We get to see, obviously, it's, basically him, stating the information that he's, found in regards to trying to solve this mystery of the comedian's death and the variety of other things that are going on. But we also get a sense of what his personality is like, his political leanings, those goddamn liberals, as he says at one point. And how, Harry S. Truman was in the right to drop the bomb on the Japanese. It's like, dude's also a racist. That's the other aspect of Rorschach people I think often forget. He's racist, which we see that carry forward in the Watchmen series by Damon Lindelof. Now, whether or not Rorschach would have wanted something like that, I don't think he would, but there's no doubt. There's no doubt that he is also racist. And that's interesting. Again, we were following a character who is, all these characters aren't perfect, but the character who's he's the cool one, he's the vigilante, he's the Batman one, but he has all these, these variety of issues that make him, unappealing. But at the same time, the reason why people are obsessed with him, fascinating, because we learn more about his history. We learn more about, what are the reasons why compel him, the thing that broke him. Because we see these flashback sequences where he doesn't have, because Dr. Manhattan, he has the word bubbles, right? He has the blue word bubbles that make him sound like kind of ethereal and otherworldly. But then we see with, Rorschach, his are all kind of sketchy, right? They're not nice and smooth, right? They're kind of weird and pointy and everything like that. And wiggly, and so it's made to get you, make you understand he's kind of talking like this or something like that. It's a bit of a growl, right? Very Batman-esque in a way, and but we see in the flashbacks he doesn't have that, and so something happens. And one of my favorite parts of the book is the thing that breaks him. And we also get this a sense that, okay, even before all this, he was talking with normal people. He was helping everyday citizens. And one of the most compelling parts of the book is when he agrees to help this family whose daughter has been kidnapped, and the police basically shut the case up. They don't even know anymore, right? And he's like, well, I haven't given up, and he assists this family. and he learns what actually, happened, to this girl in which she was horrifically murdered. And then her remains were fed to dogs, and the rest of her was burned. And I think that is the inciting moment for Rorschach. That's when he completely, I think, kind of makes a disconnect from his own humanity, and where he, instead of, arresting this guy, taking this man to the police like he would have done his younger years, he gets a hold of him, he kills his dogs, and then later on he burns down the apartment and watching it and everything. And then you even see, like, because you notice, like, he's very unkept throughout the graphic novel, and like there's this noticeable, like, huge stain. There's this huge stain on his coat, and it's just all the blood from that specific event. And he's just never watched. You also get the sense that people even say, like, he smells bad. Like, he's not taking care of himself anymore, because he's also a bit of a nihilist. He also seemingly doesn't care, but he's still holding to this code that he's had for. It's the only thing that I think is driving him forward, because I feel like he's lost so much of his own humanity, over the years because of that inciting event. And his code's the only thing that he needs to that compels him to move forward. Always have that code, even in the face of Armageddon. In his mind, it's like, even the face of Armageddon, I still need to do the right thing. He doesn't see the gray. He doesn't want to see the gray. He doesn't acknowledge the gray. He only sees things black and white, like, the physical like his actual mask, the manifestation of his actual mask, which I thought was, is really cool. He's a fascinating character, but like everyone else in this, he's an incredibly flawed character, and that needs to be pointed out. Along with that, there's also just the story within a story with the Black Freighter comic, that's featured in the book. In this world, like, there were originally superhero comics, like Superman was referenced, by Hollis Mason and everything, and people within the world of the graphic novel were inspired by those heroes, but because, since those heroes are just running around, then in turn it would mean that, then those comics probably wouldn't be as popular, because people can just read about it in the newspaper or see in the news, like, all the time, right? And so in this world, the comics that actually became more popular were like pirate comics and action adventure comics and spy comics, right? And we follow one in particular, which is the Black Freighter, where it's focusing on this mariner who is shipwrecked and has to survive. And Alan Moore has said it specifically references Ozymandias' own journey, where to literally use humanity, right, to save oneself. In this case, it's the death. It's the countless deaths of many people to create a foundation in which to save the world and himself. Like in the case of the mariner in the Black Freighter comic that's being read by a kid in the story, like, he literally fashions a raft made of dead cadavers, made of rotting, bloated corpses. That's what he does. And you realize, like, if you read that story, you compare it to, like, Ozymandias, it's like Ozymandias is trying to create, like, a new foundation. He's trying to create a raft in which to save humanity and save himself. But in order to do it, he has to sacrifice countless innocent people. In much in the same way that the character in the Black Freighter does. Because people have always been asking, like, what the hell does this have to do with the story itself? Other than being kind of like a, it's an interesting aesthetic aspect of this world, since superhero comics are just not popular because there are real-life superheroes. And it's because that's what the story is obviously referencing. It's like, that makes so much more sense. I think it's a really cool detail. Also, I think the artwork is quite outstanding in the book. It primarily uses a lot of secondary colors like orange, green, and violet. Not a lot of primary colors in the book, just secondary. Midway through, the color palette does change and starts to feature cooler colors like blue and gray, since the story does shift and it gets a considerably more darker tone. Gibbons, who is the artist, he uses 9-panel structure on many of the pages, and it provides, I think, a good sense of structure and organization that prevents confusing the reader. Alan Moore, he uses a ton of external and internal dialogue in this story, and I think the panel structure really helps organize it, and you don't get lost while reading the book, and so I really appreciate that. Really love the symmetry that is used throughout the work. You know, wrapping it up, like I said, I think this is much like The Dark Knight Returns, which was coming out around the same time. This is a very important book for the comic book medium. I think in the eyes of a lot of people, certainly mainstream people, you know, it opened up the idea of comics to the wider public. It is, I think it is a gateway. You know, it's taking familiar comic book tropes, superhero tropes, familiar superhero characters, and providing them with a real world setting and real world problems. And the shows, like, not to say that comic book characters don't have problems in their respective stories, they absolutely do. But, you know, this and The Dark Knight Returns and other things that are coming around the same time, I think played with the medium a little more seriously and grounded it and used the things that were defining our culture at the time in a great way that made the storytelling so compelling. And to the point where even 40 years removed from when this book was coming out, it's still so poignant. It still provides that same level of cultural impact it did in the mid 1980s. And I think the medium and other genres within that medium owe a lot to Alan Moore's Watchmen, and how it, I think, also, again, legitimized the medium for a lot of people that perhaps even disapproved of it or didn't take it seriously or didn't consider it art. You know, of course, all comic books are art. There's no doubt about that. But because of the craftsmanship, the level of storytelling, and what it was commenting on at the time is what made it so relevant and continues to make it so relevant to this day. And so Watchmen is one of the most, if not the most, I think you can make an argument, it is one of the most, if not the most important graphic novels of all time. And it's one that I am a huge fan of, and one that I really enjoy talking about on any occasion, chat. But that's just my thoughts on Alan Moore's Watchmen. What about you guys? What do you think of the book? Have you read the book before? You're interested in reading the book? Let me know. Are you not a fan of it? Do you dislike it for a host of reasons, variety of reasons? Let me know.
5 minutes later.
You know, we actually, I should mention this. I'm sorry. I should mention some of my favorite moments, you know, within the graphic novel itself. Like, as we get towards the end, and it's revealed that Ozymandias is the individual who is responsible for the death of the comedian, and we find out what his actual plan is. And by the way, I love that how when they go to him, he's like, "Oh yeah, you guys are 15 minutes too late. It's already happening." It's like, what? Which is, you know, the creation of this giant squid, which I gotta say, I'm gonna tell you right now. So that whole idea of the giant squid is dumb. It is stupid. Like, how it came to be. The idea that Ozymandias managed to get a hold of a variety of creators, whether scientists, artists, poets, authors, everywhere, and use their energy, their genius to manifest, using also experimental technology to manifest their idea into this corporeal being, this giant squid, that and have it be like this extraterrestrial threat and attacks New York, right? It explodes there, right? It's alive for only moments, and then dies, and then it reunites the planet. Like, that is a weird origin. That is pretty goddamn ridiculous. To this day, I'm like, I still don't really understand how that happened. Even the way it's explained, after reread, it's like, this still doesn't make a lot of sense. It's still kind of silly. So that's why I'll give Zack Snyder this. I feel like his change made a lot more sense, you know, especially with the context of especially when it came to Dr. Manhattan. And why people would be like, oh, yeah, of course he did it because of the way he's been acting. Like, that I get. Although, I did like how the giant squid was presented in the TV show. That was actually pretty terrifying. I was like, oh, kind of legitimized it. But its inception, how in which it was brought forth, is ridiculous. And it's nonsensical. But even after that event, we get some amazing, emotional, impactful moments in this book. And I think one of the best moments is it's one that often a lot of people, talk about is, of course, the death of Rorschach, which after pretty much Ozymandias convinces Dr. Manhattan and Night Owl to go through with the plan, just like, hey, man, let's just keep this a secret. And, humanity be better for Rorschach's like, absolutely not. I will. No, not even in the face of Armageddon. I will not back down. And he leaves, Ozymandias' secret, Antarctic base, and is going to go back to civilization to tell everyone, like, exactly what happened, anyone who would listen. And he's confronted by Dr. Manhattan. And he's like, listen, I can't let you do that. And, Rorschach, he's not going to back down. And he has an amazing moment where he rips off his mask and he starts crying. He's just, do it. Just do it. And, Dr. Manhattan kills him. Alan Moore talked about how, initially he had not planned to kill a lot of the characters off because most of the characters survived the events of Watchmen, but he knew even before midway through by issue 4, based on Rorschach's personality, because of how psychotic he is, and because he only sees the world in black and white and not gray, like Ozymandias certainly does, and certainly it's also the case with Night Owl and Dr. Manhattan, that he would have to die, that there was no other way. And it's like, yeah, it makes sense why he would die. And another thing that bothered me about that is how, like, because we get a sense that there is a friendship between Night Owl and Rorschach. They were partners back in the day, before, like, the Watchmen was formed and everything. And when Rorschach dies, like, Night Owl doesn't give a shit, like, at all. Like, it's almost like he's completely unaware of the fact that Rorschach is dead. I mean, they literally don't have those panels. I think a lot of people have misremembered, thinking, oh, no, like, Night Owl was incredibly sad when Rorschach, no, in the movie. And that's another thing I'll give Zack Snyder this. I'll praise him for this, is that Night Owl goes out to try to save Rorschach again, because that's his friend. And he witnesses Dr. Manhattan killing Rorschach. And he has that, no! He has that breakdown. And I like that. I did like that moment. So there's two things. There's two things in the movie I actually liked. I liked the how they kind of switched it up, where Dr. Manhattan was blamed for the tragic event and the circumstances in New York, and also Night Owl reacting to Rorschach's death. Outside of that, I don't like that movie at all. But those were some, like, really good, impactful moments in the book that worked for me. Thought they were absolutely beautiful. Like the dialogue that was written, and the art, and then again the use of the paneling, perfect from Dave Gibbons. That was very, very good. Very, very good. I hope everyone enjoyed the video, and I want to take the time to tell you about my Patreon, Class in the Glass, which offers hundreds of film commentaries and video reactions to numerous movies, TV shows, and cartoons. If you're a fan of shows like Batman the Animated Series and Avatar The Last Airbender, or films like Aliens and Raiders of the Lost Ark, my Patreon is the platform for you. Currently, I'm doing a subathon to reach 75 subs on the platform. If we hit 75 subs, we'll be able to start voting on the next edited YouTube reaction, which will include actual clips and scenes from the movies and shows I comment over. Choose from such films as Fire and Ice, Masters of the Universe, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie, Mortal Kombat Annihilation, or Spawn. Subscribing at any tier level is appreciated, and feel free to give feedback at any time. Thank you again for watching the video, and see you next time.